Okay, today we are going to learn about the aperture and the depth of field. So first of all, what is aperture? Well, the aperture is the actual opening that allows the light to go into the camera. You have complete control over that size of the opening. When you are setting it on the camera, what you're controlling is called the f-stop. So if you look at the picture here on the right, the letter F shows up, and then you have this and 1.4, and an f-stop here of 1.4 demonstrate that you actually have a really large opening. That's because an f-stop is represented in the form of a fraction. And so an f16 in this case actually means that we have the smallest size opening possible. When you have a large opening, lots of light is able to come in. So that's really good, say if you're in low light conditions. And a small opening means that less light is going to be able to come in. Now, we don't choose an f-stop based on the amount of light that's available. We actually use or choose an f-stop based on the type of depth of field that we are looking for. So I've placed this picture here so that you can actually see here, this is your aperture. This is the opening where the light is going to go into the camera. So what is depth of field? Depth of field is the part of the image that is going to be in sharp focus. So if you imagine splitting a photo in different layers, from the layers of the things that are near the person taking the photo to everything that is further and further away, those are the layers. And the more layers are in focus, the longer the depth of field, and the less layers are in focus, the more you will have a short or a shallow depth of field. So when we look at this image here at the top, the person taking the photo is standing close to this bike, and this layer is in focus, and every layer thereafter I can actually make out, I could probably count exactly how many bikes are here. So everything from what is near to what is far is in focus. In this image here, I only have one layer that is in focus, and it's actually not the layer that is closest to the photographer. So you can imagine the photographer was standing here, and the first little bit of rocks here, I can make out that they're rocks, but they are kind of blurry. The edges kind of blend into one another. So that first layer isn't in focus. If I go and move further away from the photographer, now here I have the next layer, the next depth, and this one is in focus. So I can make out the pebbles, I can make this out. So now that is in sharp focus. So that layer is focused, and then everything afterwards is out of focus. So because I only have one layer here that is in focus, I will say that that is a short depth of field. So here's how the aperture is in control of the depth of field. So when I choose an f-stop of f2.8, and remember that's a fraction, so it actually means that my aperture size is quite large at this point. Look how shallow my depth of field is. The only little bit here that is focused is right where I'm hovering right now, so extremely shallow depth of field. And as I increase my f-stop, or as I decrease my aperture size, so my aperture size is decreasing going from left to right, I am increasing the number of layers that are in focus. So in the end, when I use the largest f-stop available, or the smallest aperture size available, represented by the f32, I will have almost all the layers here that are focused. So here's another example of what I was just saying. So we've got a really small aperture, and I could probably make out all or most of the numbers here. Whereas when I'm choosing a very large opening, I'm only able to make out a couple of the numbers here on the measuring tape. So now you have an idea as to how the aperture, which is the opening, controls the depth of field, or the amount of layers that are focused. So again, for you guys who are visual, here's another way to look at it. person taking an image has at least 3 layers. We have the rabbit layer, we have the cat on a box layer, and then the tree in the background layer. And if I'm really just interested in the cat and I really don't want to see the rabbit, I don't want to see the tree, I might choose an f-stop that is like an f2.8, which is a large opening, and notice my depth of field. DOF is depth of field, and it is only 1 layer, so it's very shallow. As I keep increasing my f-stop number, my depth of field here keeps getting bigger. That's represented here by this dark gray box. And then in the very last example, my depth of field has increased. I'm catching all the layers. And so you would expect in this image for the rabbit and the cat, as well as the tree, to be in perfect focus. So how do you set your f-stop on the camera? So first you have to set your main dial and, your mode dial. Your mode dial is the one that has all the icons and letters on it. You want to set it to aperture priority. That means that you're going to be in control of the size of the aperture. So it's a little bit different from Canons and Nikons, but Canons you want to set it to AV, and for Nikons you're going to send it to A. In both cases it's the same thing. Then you need to decide what kind of picture you want to take. Do you want to have a long depth of field, or do you want to have a shallow depth of field? And when you are in aperture priority and you look in your LCD monitor, you're going to notice that the f-stop, the part that you're in control of right now, is highlighted. So it's highlighted in a blue box. So that when you turn your main dial, this one here is your main dial, it is going to affect the f-stop that's here. So if you want to do a shallow depth of field, like in this case here, you want to do f5.6. And if you wanted to do a long depth of field, you're going to set it to maybe an f29 by turning your mode dial. As you will see, this bar here is going to change. The f-stop on your LCD monitor is what's going to change. So here's a tip and something that some students tend to forget. The camera is going to choose for you what the ideal shutter speed is for the f-stop that you have chosen. Now the ideal shutter speed is chosen by the camera based on the light sensor. It's going to be different based on the light conditions that you are in and even what object you're taking a photo of. The camera knows what the best f-stop is to ensure that you produce a perfectly exposed image. You need to look at what your shutter speed is. So right now I'm circling over this 1/30. That represents 1/30th of a second. So a person taking a photo wanted an f-stop of 4.5. The camera chose a shutter speed of 1/30th. You need to pay attention to that, because if it is less, as in slower, than 1/60th of a second, you need to stabilize the camera. You will have to use a tripod or place the camera on the table to take your photo. If you try to take a photo handheld at 1/30th or anything that is slower than 1/60th of a second, your image will come out blurry. Okay, now I want to know if you've understood the concept we've just talked about, aperture and depth of field. So get ready. I'm going to show you a few different images and be prepared to answer some questions right here. Good luck. All right, so how did you do on those questions? If you had some trouble with some of them, I strongly recommend that you look at this video again and take down some notes, especially the part where I say you have to ensure that your shutter speed is always at least 1/60th of a second when you're taking a photo. Good luck!